The alpha male who had no idea who he was messing with. My wife's alpha male cornered me at her company party and said, "You're not even competition. You're just furniture." But what he didn't know was that I'd been recording everything for weeks, and his boss's wife was already on my payroll. What happened in the next 72 hours didn't just destroy his career. It exposed a conspiracy that reached the very top of their billion-dollar company. If you're into the honest stories about relationships, trust, and betrayal, hit that follow button. You won't want to miss the next one. The boardroom went dead silent when Marcus finished his little speech. 26 executives, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips, all staring at me like I was about to explode. My wife Sarah stood exactly 6 feet to my right. I know because I'd been measuring distances all evening, calculating angles, planning my next move. "You should probably head home," Marcus continued, straightening his already perfect tie. "Let her network with people who can actually help her career." That's when I smiled, not the nervous smile of an embarrassed husband, but the cold smile I hadn't used since my military days. The smile that meant someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Marcus thought he was humiliating me in front of Sarah's colleagues. What he didn't know was that the pen in my jacket pocket had been recording everything for the past 15 minutes. What he also didn't know was that his wife, Elena, had been texting me for 3 weeks, ever since I'd sent her the photos of him with my wife in that Denver hotel. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this really started. 3 months ago, Sarah began working late every night. Not unusual for a marketing executive, except her stories never quite added up. "Client dinner with the Johnson Group," she'd say, but the Johnson Group's headquarters were in Seattle, not downtown where she claimed to be eating. Then came the business trips: Denver, Chicago, Miami. Always cities where Marcus just happened to be presenting keynotes or attending conferences. Always returning with new jewelry, new clothes, new confidence. I'm not an idiot. I run a private security firm specializing in corporate espionage. I know how to spot patterns, how to follow money trails, how to gather evidence without leaving fingerprints. So I did what I do best. I investigated. What I found wasn't just an affair. It was a systematic operation. Marcus wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was running what I can only describe as a corporate harem. 5 different women in the company, all married, all receiving performance bonuses and promotions in exchange for their services. All with husbands who'd been carefully marginalized, transferred to different departments, or pushed out entirely. The genius of it was the psychological manipulation. He'd convinced these women that their husbands were holding them back, that they deserved better, that success required sacrifice. Meanwhile, he'd undermine the husbands professionally and socially, making them look weak, incompetent, disposable. Sarah was just his latest project. But Marcus made one critical mistake. He assumed I was like the other husbands, passive, trusting, afraid to rock the boat. He had no idea that I'd spent 15 years in military intelligence before starting my security company. He had no idea that when someone threatens what's mine, I don't get emotional. I get methodical. The first thing I did was install surveillance software on Sarah's phone and laptop. Not to spy on her personally, but to map the network. I needed to know everyone involved, every communication, every meeting, every financial transaction. What I discovered was bigger than just Marcus. This went all the way to the top. Elena Martinez Chen, Marcus's wife, wasn't just the CEO's daughter. She was the unofficial enforcer of the company's culture. She knew about her husband's activities. Hell, she was coordinating them. The whole operation was designed to identify and eliminate potential threats to the family's control of the company. But Elena had made her own mistake. She'd underestimated how much evidence a scorned spouse could gather when they had the right skills and unlimited motivation. I spent 2 months building my case. Bank records showing suspicious bonuses tied to hotel bookings, email threads discussing performance evaluations that had nothing to do with actual work, security footage from hotels, restaurants, and office buildings, phone records showing late-night calls between Marcus and multiple married employees. Most damning of all, I found the list. Hidden in Marcus's encrypted files, which weren't nearly as secure as he thought, was a spreadsheet titled Executive Development Program. It contained names, photos, marital status, and detailed psychological profiles of 23 female employees. Next to each name was a status: in progress, completed, or targeted. Sarah was listed as in progress. The woman sitting next to her at tonight's party was marked targeted. But here's where it gets interesting. At the bottom of the list was a separate section titled Obstacles Removed. It contained the names of 17 men, all former employees who'd been fired, demoted, or forced to resign after their wives entered the program. Marcus wasn't just collecting trophies. He was systematically destroying families to maintain corporate control. And the company's leadership was not only aware of it, they were facilitating it. That's when I decided it wasn't enough to expose Marcus. I needed to bring down the entire system. The party tonight was supposed to be Marcus's victory lap. He'd just been promoted to senior vice president, and Sarah had been named director of strategic initiatives, a position that didn't exist 6 months ago. They were celebrating their success, both professional and personal. What they didn't know was that I'd turned Elena against them 3 weeks ago. It started with a simple email to her personal account. Just a few photos of Marcus with Sarah in Denver, along with a single line: "I thought you should know what your husband does on business trips." Most wives would have confronted their husbands immediately, created drama, blown up the whole operation. But Elena was different. She was calculating, strategic, patient. She understood that revenge served cold is much more devastating than hot anger. Within 24 hours, she'd responded with a single word: more. Over the next 3 weeks, I fed her everything. Not just about Sarah, but about all of them. The complete scope of Marcus's operation, the company's involvement, the destroyed families, the financial fraud. Elena realized that her husband hadn't just been cheating on her. He'd been making her complicit in a criminal conspiracy that could destroy everything her family had built. That's when she became my ally. Elena had access to everything: board meeting minutes, financial records, internal communications, personnel files. She'd been quietly gathering evidence from the inside while I gathered it from the outside. Tonight's party wasn't just a celebration, it was a trap. After Marcus delivered his humiliating little speech, I excused myself to the bathroom. But instead of hiding in embarrassment like he expected, I sent a single text to Elena: "Now." Within minutes, Marcus's phone started buzzing, then Sarah's, then every executive in the room. Elena had sent the complete evidence package to the entire board of directors, along with copies to the SEC, the IRS, and 3 investigative journalists who specialized in corporate corruption. The subject line was simple: "My husband's performance review." I watched from across the room as Marcus's face went from confused to concerned to panicked. Sarah was frantically texting, trying to reach someone who could explain what was happening. The other executives were huddled in small groups, whispering urgently. But the real show was just beginning. Elena walked into the party at exactly 9:47 p.m. Not through the main entrance, but through the private executive elevator that required her access card. She was accompanied by 2 men in expensive suits, lawyers by the look of them, and a woman with a camera. The room went silent again, but this time it was different. This wasn't the awkward silence of social discomfort. This was the deadly silence of prey realizing they're surrounded by predators. Elena walked directly to Marcus, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. When she reached him, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't create a scene. She simply said, "Security will escort you out now. Your personal belongings will be sent to your attorney." Marcus tried to play dumb. "Elena, what's going on? What are you talking about?" She handed him a tablet. On the screen was the first page of a 200-page document titled Sexual Harassment in Corporate Fraud Investigation, Preliminary Findings. "Page 47 has the photos of you with Sarah in Denver," she said calmly. "Page 73 has the bank records showing fraudulent bonuses. Page 156 has the testimony from your previous victims." Marcus's face went white. Sarah looked like she was going to be sick. "The FBI will want to speak with both of you tomorrow morning," Elena continued. "I suggest you contact attorneys, good ones." That's when Marcus made his final mistake. Instead of leaving quietly, instead of accepting that he'd been outplayed, he decided to go down swinging. "You can't prove anything," he said, his voice getting louder. This is all circumstantial. You're just a bitter wife trying to... Elena held up her phone. On the screen was a video. Marcus in his office 3 weeks ago, on a conference call with his father-in-law, discussing the executive development program in explicit detail. They were laughing about the weak husbands they'd eliminated, joking about which wives would be recruited next. Your office is bugged, Marcus, Elena said. Has been for 6 months. Every call, every meeting, every conversation. I have 847 hours of recordings. The room was so quiet you could hear the champagne bubbles popping in abandoned glasses. Marcus looked around desperately, searching for allies, for someone who might help him salvage this situation. But every face he saw reflected the same cold calculation. Nobody was going down with this ship. Sarah finally spoke up. Elena, please, we can work this out. Marcus and I, we never meant for... For what? Elena interrupted. For your husband to find out? For the fraud to be discovered? For the other victims to come forward? She turned to address the entire room. Ladies and gentlemen, effective immediately, Marcus Chen Martinez is terminated from all positions within the Martinez group of companies. A complete forensic audit will begin Monday morning. Anyone who participated in or facilitated the activities documented in tonight's evidence package will be terminated and face potential criminal charges. The exodus began immediately. Executives grabbing their coats, making quiet phone calls to lawyers, calculating how much distance they could put between themselves and the scandal before morning. Sarah tried one last desperate play. She walked over to me, tears in her eyes, reaching for my hand. Please, she whispered. You don't understand. I was trying to build something for us, for our future. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd been married to for 8 years, who I'd trusted completely, who I'd built a life with, and all I felt was nothing. I understand perfectly, I said. You chose ambition over integrity and him over me. Now you get to live with those choices. I turned to Elena. Thank you for your assistance in this matter. She nodded. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. Justice served is always satisfying. As I walked toward the elevator, Sarah called after me. Where are you going? We need to talk about this. I paused and looked back one final time. No, we don't. My attorney will contact yours about the divorce proceedings. Everything you need to know is in the papers. You'll be served tomorrow. The elevator doors closed on the wreckage of her world. But the story doesn't end there. The next 72 hours were a masterclass in corporate destruction. Elena hadn't just exposed Marcus's operation. She'd used it as justification to purge the entire company of anyone who posed a threat to her family's control. 17 executives were terminated by Monday morning. The SEC investigation resulted in $47 million in fines and criminal charges against 6 senior managers. 3 wives who'd participated in the scheme were arrested for fraud and conspiracy. Marcus himself was convicted on 14 counts of sexual harassment, fraud, and racketeering. He's currently serving 8 years in federal prison. His appeal was denied last month. Sarah tried to cut a deal with prosecutors, claiming she was a victim rather than a willing participant. It might have worked, except I had recordings of her laughing about the pathetic husbands they'd eliminated, including me. She got 4 years and is currently serving her sentence at FCI Danbury. But the most satisfying part wasn't the justice. It was what came after. Elena offered me a position as head of corporate security for the Martinez Group, not out of gratitude, but out of respect. She'd seen how methodically I'd dismantled her husband's operation, and she wanted those skills working for her instead of against her. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd been dismissed as furniture was now in charge of protecting a billion-dollar empire. 6 months later, Elena and I were having dinner at the same restaurant where Marcus used to meet his victims. We weren't romantic. We were both too damaged for that and too professional to complicate our working relationship. But we understood each other in a way that most people never could. Do you ever regret it? She asked, destroying everything instead of just walking away. I thought about it while I watched the servers reset tables for the next day's business. No, I said finally. Walking away would have meant letting him do this to other families. Sometimes destruction is the only path to justice. Elena nodded. My father always said that power isn't about what you can build. It's about what you're willing to tear down to protect what matters. And what matters to you? Control, she said without hesitation. The family business, our reputation, our legacy. Marcus threatened all of that with his games. And what matters to me is that no one else goes through what I went through. No other husband gets blindsided by his wife's betrayal while some corporate predator plays puppet master. We understood each other perfectly. A year later, I received an invitation to Marcus's parole hearing. He was trying to get early release, claiming he'd found religion and wanted to make amends. I didn't attend, but I sent a letter to the parole board. It was 17 pages long and detailed every family his operation had destroyed, every career he'd ended, every life he had damaged in pursuit of power and pleasure. The parole was denied. Sarah wrote to me once from prison, a long letter full of apologies and explanations, trying to make sense of how she'd gotten so lost. She said she'd been weak, that she'd been manipulated, that she'd made terrible choices but never stopped loving me. I never wrote back, not out of cruelty but out of clarity. The woman I'd loved had never really existed. She'd been a character Sarah played while building the life she actually wanted. The real Sarah was someone who could laugh about destroying innocent people while planning her own husband's humiliation. I couldn't forgive someone I'd never actually known. These days, I run security for one of the most powerful families in the country. I prevent the kind of corporate conspiracies that almost destroyed my life. I identify threats, neutralize them quietly, and ensure that the people I protect never have to face what I faced. It's satisfying work. Elena and I still have dinner sometimes, usually to discuss business, but sometimes just to talk. We're both different people than we were 2 years ago. Harder, more cynical, but also more honest about what we're capable of when pushed. Do you think Marcus knew? She asked me recently. When he was giving you that speech about being furniture, do you think he had any idea what he was unleashing? I considered the question. No, he saw what he expected to see. A weak man married to an ambitious woman. He never looked deeper. That was his fatal flaw. Among many, we sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd survived a war most people never even realize is being fought. The corporate world is full of predators like Marcus, people who see marriage and family as obstacles to be eliminated rather than institutions to be respected. They count on decent people being too shocked, too hurt, too overwhelmed to fight back effectively. They're usually right, but sometimes, just sometimes, they pick the wrong target. Sometimes they threaten someone who has the skills, the resources, and the cold patience necessary to destroy them completely. Marcus thought I was furniture. He was wrong. I was a weapon he never saw coming. And by the time he realized his mistake, it was far too late to matter. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.